Sure, let's start. So, hi guys, I'm Karthik. I'm from a small startup called Data Link. So, we are looking at publishing data APIs over unstructured data that exists on the web. And open data, open government data is one data vertical that we are seriously pursuing. So, before I even start off with the presentation, I'll just give you a background about how we approach this problem and why did we even start thinking about open data. So, we previously were working for a large media house, and we were handling their entire data management division. And during we often had news editors and data analysts from the editorial team come up to us and tell us that there is this data that exists on the web. Can you give us this data in one CSV or in one Excel sheet or something like that? And we often used to scrape a lot of data that existed on the web, and we used to provide them to these news editors so that they can carry forward their analysis, come up with their stories around data. And that is when we actually it dawned upon us that a lot of data actually exists on the web. Data sources exist on the web that continuously produce data, but it is the problem of the first problem is that of discoverability, and the second problem is that of accessibility. The problem of discoverability is that people don't know where to look for data. They don't know whether any existing data sources exist, or they don't know how to access the data, because data is present in Anand was talking about in PDFs, in CSVs, in Excel sheets, Word documents, and all of it. So that was when we thought about creating easy to use APIs on top of this data. So what Data Leap does is it actually aggregates data that exists on the web, be it open government data or proprietary data, and we actually give it, we give APIs so that people can easily use this data. So just to give you a brief overview, over time there has been a tremendous increase in data producers on the web. So you have open data initiators, you have social media taking off, you have blogs, news sites, and all of it coming up. And at the other end, there have also been consumers. Consumers are also increasing. So you have businesses which are interested in getting certain kind of data, be it in social media analysis or even be it in open government data. Or you have communities like the water portal or the accountability initiative, which are actually focused on certain set of data verticals. So if you look at data accessibility, how are people actually accessing this data? There are various mechanisms by which people are actually accessing this data. Be it, so they just download these from these sources, or they manually collect this data, or they write their own scrapers or buy CDs. And there is also this concept of APIs, which I want to delve on, and I just want to have your views also on some approaches that we've been taking. And So, as we all know, humongous amounts of data being generated. So we have seen open data initiatives picking up like anything, especially in the US and we have a lot of unstructured data sets which are being published. So we were actually surprised by the amount of data that is actually published by the Indian government on many of these websites. Okay, any data that you look at, if you spend some time with certain set of confidence, we can tell that you will be able to find the data. And there has been a tremendous growth in the data that is being produced also. So what are the use cases? How are people that we talk to, how are media organizations or how are data analysts using this? We have the app economy where people are talking about applications, building applications. You have apps for democracy. In the US, you have standalone applications which are being built, and people are using them for their own analysis, right? So, with respect to application programming interfaces, so how are people actually using APIs? What are basically APIs? So, APIs are nothing but, just to give you a definition, they act as interfaces between programs, and APIs are a means of distributing data, right? So why do we have data APIs in the first place? When you say you have to build applications on top of it, or when you say you have to perform analysis on any kind of data, what is the first step that anybody goes through? The first step that anybody goes through is getting the right data in the right form, right? So when you look at the data that exists on the different data sources that actually exist, that actually produce a lot of data, data comes in its own formats, data is spread across different sources, and what this ensures is that it is not machine readable. So your application can't have just one way of reading data that has to be used by applications or that is going to be used by end users. Okay. And the next point is you can query relevant bits, right? As in, let's say you have a huge data set, the census data set, or you have huge data sets of 30 GB, 1 terabytes of data, and you are only interested in some parts of it. You are just say interested in just 6 MB of the data. You are just interested in 600 records from the data. Why should you actually have to download the entire data set and not just be able to get the data that you are interested in performing your analysis on, or you are interested in? And there has been what we define as information silos. So there are a lot of organizations which are publishing their own data, and this creates some kind of an information silo. So in the first talk we were actually talking about meter reading, right? As in how do you predict spikes, and what happens in these cases is there is this area of saying, right, I guess it's by Google, more data beats better algorithms. So you will not be able to tell with a fair amount of accuracy that by just looking at this data set that this is the prediction model for it. But let's say for that particular example you have data about events, data about public holidays. You will be able to predict it with a far better accuracy than what you would have done in case you just had these information silos. So, and what do data APIs also do? They help you create mashups. Okay, can weather data actually have any influence on stock prices? Is there a correlation? Or or commodity prices, are they influencing the profits of a particular organization? You don't know that. It only can happen when you have all these data sets which are available to you, which is easily queryable, right? So so when you have data APIs which are created, right? So what you are ensuring is that the ecosystem of APIs that you are going to build over different data sets, what you are ensuring is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So before you just had information silos, but now you have a lot of data sources with you. You have a lot of different diverse data sets which are accessible through APIs. Now all of them put together, which can be accessed through APIs, ensures that you will be able to do much more with this data. Even if it had been in their own information silos, you wouldn't have been able to do such an analysis. So yes, some of the design issues that we face when we are looking at APIs and all that, you have to be very sure about who are the users and what are the possible use cases of this data. So it's never possible to assume all use cases, but what we have seen is once you publish APIs, once you publish data which can be easily accessed, people are going to come up with their own use cases. That's what we have noticed. And load management, because if you have analytics or if you have applications which are dependent on your API, there are going to be surges in your load, and so how do you do load management? And there is also this thing about static versus dynamic data. Temporal, there is for some kind of data there is some temporality added, right? Like changing commodity prices or stock prices and all that. So what is the kind of data that you are actually looking at? And one more thing that you have to actually look at is if we are looking at open government data, and if we are, if we want the government to publish all these different data sets, are we saying that the data provider itself has to provide the infrastructure for the API? So these are all the design issues, because there have been certain data publishing platforms on the web which actually help governments publish this data. And one more argument against APIs is that it is limiting. Sometimes you don't have access to the whole data set, so you won't be able to do all this analysis. So instead of which, if you had a bulk data download, then you would be able to do far more analysis on this particular data. And so also the formats in which you have this data downloadable and all. So just to give you some final thoughts, what we feel is the approach that we took above for APIs is that it allows some kind of experimentation. Be it developers or be it data analysts, they can use these APIs and they can sort of experiment with it. It enables you to experiment without having to download the entire data set or pay for a particular data set. And when APIs publish data in standard formats, users need not worry about fetching this data in the right form. And for frequently updated data sets, APIs are a boon actually. So users need not have to worry about downloading CSVs every 10 minutes when the data gets updated. And also in terms of relationships, so how do you map this entire data set? How do you map different data sources? What are the relationships that actually come along with them? It all helps you do that. So this was pretty much it. We also want to show you some APIs which we already have available, and you guys can just experiment around with them. And that's it. So we actually did some visualizations on. This is actually a dynamic visualization of tweets. So the point that we wanted to drive here was that once this data is made available in a format which is easy to use, right? People will be able to come up with interesting analysis on top of this data. So the whole point is about getting the right data in the right form. Once you have that, the kind of use cases, the kind of analysis you can do on top of the data is very rich. So we have a list of all APIs. So we have APIs of retail prices of essential commodities.
So do you impose some kind of a license and I don't know, API call limitation on this data that you're?
So what we are following is that data that is free on the web, data that is open on the web, remains open on data. So we just provide data as a service model, but we have a restriction on the number of calls that a free user can make. So if you want the entire fire hose of for the API, we charge for those services. But essentially, any user can come in, even without having to log in, he can touch around all these APIs. So the idea is to keep this data open as well as create a model, business model out of it. So it's actually. So you actually get a sample JSON output, and you can use these API requests to actually fetch all this data. So we have a lot of APIs available. We are coming up with a lot more of them. And that's it. Very. Thanks.